Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another new edition of Africa Today, where we get you the latest news taking place on the African scene. And our main topic today will be Sudan and the declaration of a ceasefire in Blue Nile and South Kordofan. And we're glad to be joined with Dr. Sharif Amir, political analyst on this issue. But at this report, the United Nations warned that the Democratic Republic of Congo could descend into a cycle of electoral violence similar to that seen in Burundi, and presidential and legislative polls due in November are likely to be delayed. More details in the following report.
The United Nations warned Democratic Republic of Congo could descend into a cycle of electoral violence similar to that seen in Burundi, and presidential and legislative polls due to November are likely to be delayed. A group of senior UN experts put Burundi and Congo at the top of a list of risks to watch for the next 6 months, along with Libya and the La Nina climate phenomena and drought in southern Africa. In Burundi, which has collapsed into chaos since President Pierre Nkurunziza pursued and won a third term in office last year, a move his opponents say is unconstitutional, things may get worse. It said a cycle of high-profile tit-for-tat targeted killings of top officials was widening a rift in the army that could produce a bigger conflict between pro- and anti-government forces, fueled by ethnic overtones in the political rhetoric. The UN report, which doesn't cover the biggest crisis, such as or South Sudan, aims to alert aid agencies to potential shortfalls in upcoming emergencies. Its worst fears are not always borne out. Last November, it warned of a potential coup in Burundi and possible rebels' advances in Mali, which didn't come to pass.
Welcome back, and moving on to Sudan. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has declared a comprehensive 4-month ceasefire in the states of Blue Nile and South Kordofan, where fighting between armed rebels and government troops has left scores of casualties. Details follow.
President Omar al-Bashir has declared a 4-month ceasefire in 2 states of Blue Nile and South Kordofan, where recent fighting between troops and rebels has left scores of casualties. Bashir's forces have been battling the rebel Sudan People's Liberation Movement North in the 2 states since 2011, and neither side has decisively gained an upper hand in the fighting. The ceasefire was anticipated ahead of the start of the rainy season that leaves roads in these regions impassable. Khartoum limits press access to the war-hit border regions, making it nearly impossible to verify the often contradictory reports from the army and the SPLM about fighting them. Bashir has announced a similar ceasefire in South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and the Western Darfur region, the scene of the separate insurgency in late 2015, and extended it by month at the beginning of this year. But new fighting in Blue Nile and South Kordofan erupted after the end of that ceasefire earlier this year. Shami said that the latest ceasefire starting from Saturday doesn't extend to the war-torn area of Darfur, as there was no real rebellion now in Darfur. Sudan held a referendum in Darfur in April, with officials saying almost 98% of voters opted for retaining the region as 5 separate states.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're glad to be joined today by Dr. Sharif Amir, political analyst, Paris University. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has declared a ceasefire the areas of Blue Nile and South Kordofan, or the states rather. How do you see the situation after this ceasefire? Do you think it will be effective?
No, unfortunately, I think we're living in the same turmoil in this region. The Sudanese government is, I regard all these kind of ceasefires are like just a rest between periods of war. Unfortunately, the civilians are paying the price for it, and I think that there is no concrete settlement. A ceasefire means that they will resume the war sooner or later, and that's not a good sign at all. They're just preparing for the next battle. So I think that there is much to do to ensure that once for all, both parties will find a settlement and just stop this bloodshed.
So you don't think that this ceasefire will lead to ending the current crisis?
No, I don't see it clearly, because from experience, from what we have seen on the ground, there is no even a timetable for implementing any negotiations. They are just halting the fighting for some time, and then they will resume it. The problem, the main problem now, is the willingness of the parties. I don't see it at all. I don't see that the government of Khartoum, neither the rebels, are ready to put an end to this. And there is another thing.
So you don't think the rebels are ready to join the peace process?
I don't see even there is a lack in the international community to find a solution. We have seen all the parties now are rallying for finding a solution in Syria and in Libya and in other spots in the world. But in Sudan, we didn't hear about it since there were the independence of South Sudan. So I don't think that I think that the rebels are maybe aiming to make gain on the ground. So when there will be one day, I hope, some negotiations, they will have this de facto territories under their control.
Right. In late 2015, the president also announced a similar ceasefire, and it didn't work out.
Yeah,
right?
As I just told you, it's just the spiral of violence are just continuing. It's just a ceasefire. It means that literally, and it means that it's just a temporarily halt of fighting. They won't continue fighting for some time, and then they will resume it. We want a real end of the conflict, so this region will just spare the civilians all this bloodshed. I think that the political leadership in Khartoum should be worried about this situation and ensure that there will be a peace process, because the experience of South Sudan is very painful for Sudan. And I think that there are some parties or some elements in the international community who are aiming that Sudan will be divided in a way or another. Like in Kordofan or in Darfur.
You mean further divisions?
Yes.
It's already divided.
Yeah.
So you mean further divisions?
Yes, in addition to South Sudan.
Okay, but do you think that the situation for Sudan, both Sudan and South Sudan, has developed or advanced after the secession that took place in 2011?
This is a very complicated issue, because even in South Sudan, there is armed conflict till these days after their independence. And the hostilities between North Sudan and South Sudan are just happening every now and then. So I think that this didn't find a solution. It just reduced the bloodshed and the sacrifices made by both parties in this war. But I think that I want to underline this point, that every leadership in this region should be aware that there is a new system that it's aimed to be implemented in the region, whether in Egypt or in Libya or in other countries. So if the leadership is not keen to find solutions to ensure the unity of the country, it won't happen, and the country will be divided. So the military conflict now, I think that President al-Bashir has a huge responsibility towards his own people to try to find a political solution and negotiations, because these rebels, they are, let's call it, they are just, they manage the guerrilla wars. They don't have a specific or concrete basis. They can move everywhere. So they have little to lose. But the country, which is Sudan, will lose a lot. So I think that a ceasefire is just a waste of time, and I hope the United Nations and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will keep a close eye on this, because the explosion that could happen in Sudan, it could be devastating for the whole region, because it's full of resources and full of ethnic
resources that are not used, are not utilized.
Of course, and this is this is the story which happened in South Sudan, that the resources needed to be used by some forces, so they had to keep South Sudan apart from North Sudan, and then there will be foreign investment and foreign intervention. So I think that the same way these rebels are aiming to implement some agenda, and afterwards there is a plan for exploiting the resources. And we all know that many countries are wishing to exploit these resources. We have seen in Darfur why the world was very alarmed by what's going on in Darfur. It's just because the oil is there, and whenever we know, whenever
what
the
other
oil...
resources do they have plus the oil?
This region is very important for countries, for example, for France, China, and Russia, and the United States also, because there is mines of uranium also.
Right.
And in Niger also.
Specifically in Darfur?
In Darfur, it's mainly oil. But let's say that each party, for example, the Chinese, they have sent huge expeditions there.
Looking for uranium?
For everything. And
right.
they keep it as a secret.
Okay.
They don't declare it, so other forces won't rush to this region. But traditional forces like the French and the British, they know exactly what's there beneath the ground. That's why they were all in this rush to catch the big catch, which is Darfur.
Due to the fact that Sudan was colonized by the British for a very long period of time.
Of course, but now we're living in a new era. We have the new superpower, China.
But they know the resources. I mean, they know the resources of the Sudanese people. They
know the resources, but with the development of technology, because what you were just saying about the British colonization, now new technologies could find something else more important. And I think that uranium at a certain time wasn't that important like it is now. So I think that, and I repeat again, for example, the Chinese factor is playing an important role, because we had always the traditional elements, France, Italy, and England. Now we have also the Russians in Africa, and we have the Chinese in Africa. And I think that the battle for the resources, especially from the Chinese, from my contacts with my friends in the West, they always say we're not really that keen to keep oil in our hands because we have other resources, but we are always worried that the Chinese, if they will put their hands on oil resources, they will be a huge superpower. They're already a superpower. So we want to prevent them from doing that. So that's why I'm saying that the guerrillas and all these factions, they have people sponsoring them. And that's what I'm saying, that the government in Khartoum should be very aware that going into this process of warfare, it will, at the end, be very, very harmful for the leadership in Khartoum, especially that the President al-Bashir, he himself is someone, let's say, that the West don't like to see him around, and there's a mandate to stop him in front of the international court.
Right. How do you see the role of international organizations and specifically the United Nations regarding the situation in Sudan and South Sudan, of course?
It's, unfortunately, there's priorities for the United Nations. They have this priority in Yemen or in Syria, and even they leave it in the hands of the superpowers, let's face it. The last intervention we have seen for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in Africa, it was in the Western Sahara in Morocco, and he was blocked by the Moroccans for his views. So we don't see that the United Nations really has this power. The only thing that they have is securing aid, water, food for the and refugee camps. We have
regarding the refugee camps, the humanitarian situation for people in South Sudan in specific.
It's devastating because people are leaving the regions where there is water and where they keep their animals, their cows and everything, and these people are tribes, so they depend on the water and the animals they have. So if they leave, they go into the desert. And we have seen in Southern Sudan many things happen to people who died there for lack of water and lack of food. So I think that the UN will eventually take care of the refugee camps, but then what's going to happen afterwards? These people who are leaving their own country or own place of birth and commerce and labor, and they're going to other sections, and I think that they won't live long in these. So a political solution is always relieving.
So in your opinion, the political solution is the only way out for Sudan, and of course the Sudanese file is a very important file, and we will be following up on this issue. Dr. Sharif Amir, political analyst, Paris University, many thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Thank you.
We will be continuing our discussion with you in another episode. Dear viewers, with this we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.